So this is actually part 2 of quizzes. We spoke about some of the basic functions of quizzes in our earlier webinar. So today we're going to be talking about some of the other aspects related to quizzes. If you missed part 1, you can always go back and take a look at the recording and the slides that we've shared the link to and the other resources. We will also share the recording from today's one as well. So I'm going to be taking you through this quizzes part 2, and I do have my colleague here as well, Chengwen, who is sharing the slides. Thanks so much. So Chengwen, do you just want to say hi?
Sure. Hi, everyone, and welcome. Hope we have a good session, and feel free to ask questions in between as well. Cheers. Over to you.
Thanks, Chengwen. Right, so we're going to kick off today with quizzes part 2, and what we're going to be looking at are question pools, sections, and categories. Just to let you know that these slides, we will share the link, as we said, but if there are some refinements or improvements or slight process changes to the new platform, Amathuba, they will reflect in these slides. So these slides, while you will get the link, they are slightly dynamic and they are updated on a regular basis as things change. So today we're going to be taking a look at quiz categories, question libraries, question pools, and how to set up a report, view a report, and also take a look at the attempts log. So as I mentioned, this is additional stuff that we're going to be looking at in relation to quizzes, and it's a follow-on from part 1. So as we mentioned in the first webinar, the quizzes tool allows you to create and manage point-measured assessments. It's a way of evaluating users' learning. Today, we're going to be looking specifically at the question library and some of the additional tools where you can leverage questions that are in the library. And also how to organize them into categories is what we're going to be looking at today. So I'm not going to go through all of these points because some of these were elements that we covered in quiz 1, the part 1 of the quiz webinar. So today we are going to dive straight in to landing on the Amathuba homepage, which I'm sure you're all very familiar with. And you can find that at amathuba.uct.ac.za, and you will also see the very familiar blue login button there, the UCT login. And that is, of course, where you would access your using your UCT network credentials, your regular UCT username and password that you use for all of the systems. So once you are logged in, you will see this very familiar UCT homepage, and this is the way that you can actually access your courses. So a lot of people use the cards, what they call the cards on the front page, and you'll see there's one outlined there, and that gives you about 20 of cards all in one go. But if you actually have more than 20 courses, you can find your way around using what we call the waffle icon, which is right at the top. And that gives you the comprehensive list of all of your courses. But if it's a course that you've accessed fairly recently, you can jump right in using the cards on the home page. So once you access a course using a card, you will land on your course homepage. So this is the initial landing page of your selected course. And so from here, you would want to be accessing your quizzes. So remember, there's 2 ways to get into your quizzes. The quickest and easiest way is to go from activities and select quizzes from the drop-down list. And another way you can always access quizzes is to go via the Manage Course Admin link, because remember that Course Admin gives you the range to the full buffet of all the tools that are associated with your particular course. But we're going to go the quickest route, which is activities, quizzes. So the first thing I'm going to chat about is quiz categories. Now, quiz categories are not mandatory. It is just a way for you to actually organize and sort your quizzes, because what is going to happen over time is you are going to be working with a lot of quizzes, and depending how often you actually use them, you might end up with 50 or 60 quizzes all listed on one page. So a better way to actually organize your quizzes would be to use categories. Then you'll see on this page here, if you are using categories, under the view drop down, you have an option to actually filter the view and view by category. So then your categories that you set up, you'll be able to find those quizzes quickly and easily. So let's take a look at how you would create a category. So you start off by clicking on the Edit Category button. Now, I know that sounds a little bit counterintuitive because it almost seems to imply that you already have a category set up. But in fact, that is the button that you click on to actually create a new category as well. So once you click on Edit Categories, you'll come to a very kind of intuitive and basic screen where you can actually add your own categories. So you would click the Add Category button, you would enter the name of your category into the blank field, and you'll see that there's a couple of other columns in this table as well. One of them is sort order. So sort order means that you can determine which order you would like your categories to display on the initial quiz page. That is why I said that categories are actually very useful, because you can group your own quizzes together and you can decide the order that they will be displayed to you. So if you had, for example, quizzes that you were working on at the moment, you could create a category, something like draft, and make sure that draft was always at the top so you could quickly access those quizzes. If you had quizzes that you'd accessed right at the beginning of the term and they were kind of old, but you still wanted to keep them, you could create another category maybe called archive and move quizzes into archive. So categories are actually quite useful. So for each category you want to create, you would just click on Add Category. And once you had completed that, you could click Save and Close. That would take you back to the main screen, and you can always come back and edit your categories. You can change a name that you've given to a category. You can change the order. It's not cast in stone. So if you decide afterwards that you have a new way that you would like to organize or name your categories, you can always come back and edit them. So the name is completely editable. And you can also, on this page, decide to delete a category. Say you no longer want it, or you've maybe merged it with another category. You can delete categories here by either selecting the All checkbox, which is right at the top of the table on the left, or you select the actual category that you would like to delete, the individual category, and just click the little bin delete icon. And as I mentioned before, you can also sort the order here, ascending or descending, and you can also decide an order by just typing in 1, 2, or 3, as you would like those elements to display on the page. And you'll notice a column there that says in use with a little check mark next to it. That means that that particular category that you've created has a quiz in that category. So it's in use because there's a quiz in the category, and you'll see the other two categories here, week 1, week 2, do not have the check mark because they don't have quizzes in them as yet. Right, so that is how to create categories and why it's useful to have them. And now we're going to take a look at the question library. So in our first webinar, we took a look at how to create a basic question and add it to a quiz. So another way that you can also create quiz questions is to actually use the library. And I'm going to tell you some advantages of why you might want to be using the library more and creating questions directly in the library than just creating questions directly in a quiz. So to access the library, you'll see on your quiz homepage, you have a second tab along which says Question Library. Once you click on Question Library, you will see there is an option to create sections. Now, what are sections? Let's take a look. Once you're in the quiz library, you'll see under New, the first option, before you even get to select a question type, it says sections. So what are sections? Sections are essentially, I ask people to actually think of them as folders. So I'm sure you're very familiar with organizing your files on your computer into folders. This is exactly the same thing. So here within the question library, you have an option to create sections, what they call sections. These sections will be displayed on the left-hand side. to the left of where this drop down is. Another important element to note on this particular page is at the top right, there's a little cogwheel that says settings. So under that settings option, you will see that these are display options for the way that you would like to view this particular page. So your default settings, you can elect to show the section sidebar or not. And in this instance, I have got it shown, but there aren't any sections there yet. So that's why it looks a little blank. And then the other option is to view actions in a pop-up. So that means when you are working with a particular question or a particular section and you want to apply an action to it, such as deleting, then it would open in a little pop-up window. So I would encourage you to actually show the section sidebar, because when you're creating sections, it's much easier to be able to see them in the sidebar and to work with them that way. So when we're going to be creating a new section, you would click on New in your question library and select Section, which is the first option on the drop-down list. Then to create a section, because it's like a folder, you are, of course, going to be giving it a title. And as you can see the little asterisk there, that means that is mandatory. Your section has to have a title. The next two options are not mandatory. So you can say, you can add a text there. So a text would be something like a short description to go with your section, and you'll see that there's a checkbox there that says hide the section title from learners or hide the section text from learners. So you can decide whether or not you would like the students to be able to see which section these questions are coming from, and also optionally if you would like them to see the short description associated with that section. If you don't want them to see that, and these titles and these descriptions are just purely for your purpose for categorizing and organizing, then you would omit those check marks next to those two options. Then at the bottom there, important to note that this is another place where you can put on the option to shuffle questions in this section. So if you are creating a section and you're going to be populating it with questions, this is where you can enable shuffling of the questions that are contained within this particular section. So when creating a new section, you're going to have a title, a description. You can make it available to the students if you want to, and you can also enable shuffling. And once you've made these options, you can click Save. Right, so once you click Save and you go back to your question library, and now that we've enabled the section sidebar to be visible, you can see on the left in the section sidebar, we now have two sections. So they look exactly like folders. That's why I say that you should think of sections as folders. And you can see there's two here, one called week 1 and one called week 2. So you can also see that is displayed on the main pane area as well. So next to week 1 and week 2, you'll see there's also little drop down arrows where you can actually go in and edit. So if you decide later on, okay, I actually need not just week 1, maybe I need week 1A and week 1B, maybe there were 2 quizzes during that time, you can always go in and edit what you have set up for those sections. So you can see here, it indicates to you at the bottom there that there are a total of 2 sections, and you can also see on this pane that for week 2 that shuffling has been turned on. So this gives you a quick synopsis of what's happening with your sections. Right, on the next slide here, we can see that on these sections, you also have the option of changing the order. So at the moment, I've got week 1 and then week 2. If you wanted to change that around, or say, for example, you added in additional sections, this is where you could change the order or reorder your sections. So you would do that by clicking on the order action at the top there, and it would give you this little pop-up window. Remember, this was one of the display options where it said to you in the settings, would you want your actions to be displayed in a new pop-up window? And I had that checked for yes. So when I reorder my sections, this little window will pop up, and all you have to do is use the up and down arrows that are in the bottom right-hand corner to determine the order. Well, we only have 2 sections here, so it's not much of a choice of an order. You would use those arrows and then click Save to reorder your sections. Some other actions that you can also apply to your sections, you can see you've got Move, you've got Delete, and you've got Edit Values. So in the first webinar, we spoke about these multi-action functions, and these ones are similar in that you need to have made a selection first before you can apply any of these actions. So for example, if you wanted to delete a particular section, you would need to first select it and then go for the delete option. You can either apply all, the top checkbox is select all, that would be everything, or you would check the particular section that you would like to apply the action to. So Move, Delete, and Edit Values are all multi-action functions where you need to make a selection first. On the next slide, you'll see that here, if you take a look at Move, here I have a question, and I would like to move this particular question into a designated section. So at the top here, you can see on our sidebar, we have week 1 and week 2. That's a way of navigating. Another way of navigating is to the right of that, you'll see a breadcrumb trail. So I'm sure you're pretty familiar with breadcrumb trails that were also used in Vula as well. So in the question library, you can see there it says question library and then a little arrow to the right and then week 1. So that is how you know that you're working in the week 1 folder. And it also has a nice bold heading there saying week 1. So you can see in week 1, we have 2 questions here. And I would like to move the second question into a different folder or a different section. So what I would do is first select the check mark in front of that second question there that I want to move, because remember, I'm going to be using this multi-action. So I need to make a selection first, and then I would click the Move button. And then in my pop-up window, it would ask, where would you like to move this question to? As it is already sitting in section called week 1, my options are to move it to week 2, which is my other section, or you can also see there it says collection to root. So root would be basically the home space, the parent folder, which is not week 1 or week 2. So I would just select the section I would like to move it to, and then I would click Save. You're not seeing the Save button here at the moment, but if I'd made a selection, you would see the Save button there. On the next screen, you'll be able to see Delete. So Delete works very similarly. You would need to make a selection first, then click Delete. As with most delete options, it always gives you that warning. Are you really sure that you want to delete the selected items? And if you really want to go ahead, you would click on the Delete button to get rid of that particular question. And then the last option we're going to take a look at on the next slide is Edit Values. So similarly, you would select your question or questions, if there were many that you wanted to select first, and then click on Edit Values. So what can be edited under the Edit Values? It's these 3 columns that are displayed here called Points, Difficulty, and Mandatory. So Points is fairly self-explanatory. It's the points per question. So that is the point value of that particular question. So at the moment, that question is worth 1 point. If I wanted to change it to 2 points or 3 points, this is where I could do that. The difficulty is just a way of, it's a categorization for yourself. It's not mandatory to categorize the difficulty of all the questions, but sometimes people like to use this to make sure they have an even spread, maybe of easy questions, moderate questions, and difficult questions. And then if you would like to make this particular question mandatory, then this is where you could select that checkbox, and this would be a mandatory question that would always appear in the quiz. This is something that would come into play if you had things like question pools in play, where you would be getting a random selection of questions. If you make a question mandatory, this one won't be part of the pool, so it won't be part of the random selection. It would always be present in the quiz. Right, so I'm just going to check in if there's any questions up until this point. I'm not seeing anything in the chat, but if you have any questions, please feel free to enter in there or raise your hand or just unmute and ask your question. Right, so here you can see we are in week 1. Again, you can either use the sidebar or you can use the breadcrumb trail at the top or the heading to establish which particular section you're in. And you can see there's 2 questions here because it says so at the bottom as well. It says total 2 questions. So on each question, there are some options to be aware of as well. So we're going to have a look at the option called preview. So preview is a handy way to actually see exactly what this question looks like, how it would actually be displayed to the student. So if you click on preview, on the next screen, you'll be able to see this is the preview that it would show you. And this is quite handy because at the top, it shows you when taking the question, it would appear as, so that is what a student would see. So this is just a really basic true and false. So it's quite an easy layout to see. And then below that, when grading the question, it would appear as, and you can see it looks almost the same, except obviously you have the little blue arrow indicating the correct option there. And then if you had added comments, remember comments are optional. It's a way of feedback, and hints are optional as well. Then you would have that displayed there. And a very useful option displayed on this preview as well is it says this question is also in the following. So that means if this question has been used in another quiz or in one of the other quizzes, this is where it would actually be displayed to you. So you can see there the quiz there I've got is something called sample questions, and you can see that this particular question is actually in pool 1 in that particular quiz. So in that way, using the preview option, if you can't remember where you've used a particular question from the library in another quiz, this will indicate and list for you all the spaces where that particular question has been used. So preview is quite a handy option. And on the next slide, you'll be able to see the other option I want you to be aware of is attempts. So attempts is also very handy because it shows you how many people have attempted this particular question. And again, this is useful if you have question pools in play, because remember that the students are going to be given a random selection of questions. So if you want to see how many people have attempted this particular question, using the attempts option on a question gives you this little pop-up graph, which actually shows the attempts made on a particular question. So you can see it indicates the correct answer. So you'll be able to see how many people selected the available options of this particular question. Right, so in the question library, you can also import existing questions. So say, for example, you had created a quiz and you'd created questions in that quiz so that those questions were not actually sitting in the library. They were actually only sitting in that particular quiz, and you wanted to bring them into the library. So the usefulness of having questions in the library is, of course, that when you're creating a quiz, it's the library is a central repository so that you can actually create or populate a quiz by picking questions from the library. So it puts them in a very accessible space where you can potentially reuse quiz questions and compile a quiz really quickly from existing questions. So that is one of the greatest advantages of having your questions in the library. But if you have created a quiz and your questions are not yet in the library, it's very easy to actually pull those questions in to the library so they can be reused in another quiz. So you can import your existing questions. At the very top, you can see import, and on the drop-down list, it'll say browse existing questions. So once you click on browse existing questions, it is going to show you a screen where your questions are listed. So it might look a little bit intimidating, but if we go through all of these slowly, you'll see it's actually quite easy. So here it is actually showing you some existing questions, which may or may not be in the library. So at the top right-hand side, you can see there is an option that says source. So source means where it is looking for these particular questions. So from source, you can actually change that drop-down list to point to a particular quiz that you may have already created containing questions. So if you're looking for particular questions, always make sure that the source is looking at the quiz where you want to pull the questions in from. That's quite important. And then on the middle of the pane there, you can see that in order to pull those questions in, all you would do would be to select the desired question that you want by putting the check mark in to actually pull them in. If a question is already in the library, you'll see it has a little green check mark next to it, and it says there, already imported. So this particular quiz that we're looking at already has one of the questions that's in this quiz is already sitting in the library, and the other ones which are available to bring in will have the blank check box there waiting for you to actually make the selection. So just remember, sometimes if you're looking for a question and you can't find it, make sure that you're looking at the correct source. So if you click on the source drop-down list, you'll be able to see all the other quizzes where you've created questions. Right, so once you'd made your selection, you would just click import, and then you would actually just pull in your questions. Something that I get asked quite a bit is with these sections or folders, if you want to think of them as folders, can you actually have folders within folders? And yes, you absolutely can, because some people have kind of a logical hierarchy of how they organize their folders. Maybe they want them to look similar to the way they've got them organized in the Amathuba managed files. Yes, you can have sections within sections. And as you can see on the section sidebar there, you can see within week 1, I've got activity 1.1, 1.2, 1.3, and then week 2 only has one section just itself. But you can see that there's sections within sections, and the way to do that is exactly the same as you create other sections. You just click on new as long as you are within the section the way you want to create your additional ones. So here at the breadcrumb trail right at the top, you can see question library week 1. So we're in the week 1 section at the moment. If I wanted to create activity 1.4, I would just click on new section and create activity 1.4, and it would land up in this week 1 section. Right, so once you had finished editing all your questions, you could always click on the done editing questions to exit from the library. So that is the usefulness of having the library, and even if you haven't used it yet, you can see you can easily pull your questions in to actually populate the library. So once we have our questions in the library, what can we do with them? Well, the best thing to do is to create question pools. Now, I'm sure a lot of you will be pretty familiar with these because question pools were used quite a bit in Vula, and they work very similarly in Amathuba. So let's take a look at question pools. So as you know, question pools allow you to give students a set number of questions, which will be randomly selected from a larger pool of questions. So for example, you might have a pool of 20 questions and you tell the quiz to randomly draw a selection or give the student a random selection of 10 questions. So by doing that, you can ensure that each student would get a unique set of questions, and this is something that actually helps to maintain academic integrity and cut down on cheating and things like that during quizzes and exams. So let's see how we are going to be creating a question pool. So let's imagine that you already have a quiz created like we set up in our first webinar. So if we have an existing quiz, what we would do is we would go to the option which says edit. So it's the drop-down list on the particular quiz where you want to add a pool. You would click edit. Once you get into the edit screen within that particular quiz, you'd go to the familiar spot where you had previously added questions. You can see this particular quiz already has 5 individual questions in it. And you would click on Add Edit Questions because we are going to be adding a new pool to this particular quiz. Once you click on Add Edit Questions, it will give you the option. On the next screen, you'll be able to see it says add. So we're not going to be adding an individual question, and we're not going to be adding a section because we've already dealt with that. We're going to go for the third option that says add a question pool. So here you can see the 5 individual questions that are already sitting in this quiz. We now want to add a pool. So you would click add question pool. So on the question pool page, there are some important aspects to note here. So as you might expect, you need to give your question pool a title. That is mandatory. So I've just called this question pool easy questions. So it's just going to be a bunch of really easy questions. Then below that, you'll see it says number of questions to select. So in other words, this is how many questions you would like to serve up to the student. How many are going to be answered by the student? And you'll see there that although there's an empty field, you will not be able to type in this field yet because it says number of questions to enter from 0. That means that your pool does not yet contain any questions because we haven't set it up. There are 0 questions in this pool. So you can't designate a number of questions to pull from a pool of 0. So don't panic if you can't type into that field yet. It will only become editable once you start adding in questions. And then a very important aspect to note is points per question. Because each student is going to get a random selection of questions, all of the questions in the pool need to be of similar value because obviously you can't be serving up some questions that are worth 3 points to students and other students are getting a selection which may just be 1 point each. So all the questions in a question pool need to be the same value. So what happens if you create a pool from some questions that are already in the library and those questions already have random values? Maybe you're creating a pool and some of the questions from the library already have a point value of 3, maybe some are worth 5, maybe some are worth 1. What will happen is it will automatically put it down to the lowest value. So it will put it down to, if there's a 1 point value, that it'll make them all 1. It'll actually override the initial point value that is actually attributed to that question because all the questions need to be of the same value. Right, so we need to add some questions in now. So we would click on the Browse Question Library. So we're going to be pulling these questions from our question library. So once we're in the library, it's fairly straightforward because we've already worked in the library. We're familiar that we have sections and you can expand the sections to show all the questions contained within the section. So you can see here, I've expanded week 1 and within week 1, you can see those other sections that we created called activity 1.1, 1.2, 1.3. And if there were questions within there, we could expand those sections as well. And all you would have to do is select using the checkbox next to each of the questions you would like to pull in. A very handy option here, you can see on the extreme right, there's a little icon that is a preview icon. So if you can't remember exactly how this question goes or what it looks like, remember you can always use the preview option on the extreme right. So once you had selected your questions using the check marks, you would click on the import button right at the bottom. Right, so I chose 2 questions to pull in. So here you can see now my 2 questions have arrived on this question pool page. And now you'll see suddenly where it says number of questions to select, it says from 2. So it's detected that now there are 2 questions available. So that's quite a small number for a pool. It doesn't really give you a lot of variety. So really you could only pull in one from the two. So for this example, we're just going to say that we'll select one question from the pool of two. So then you'll be able to type in that first option there where it says number of questions to select. And if you would like to change your mind, you can always use the delete option, the little X on the extreme right-hand side, to remove a question from the question pool. So it's really quite intuitive and easy to use. And once you'd added all the questions that you needed to this pool, you would just click on Save. So that would take you back to the list of questions for this particular quiz. And as you can see now, remember this quiz had 5 questions originally. Now it has a 6th question, and that is actually a question pool. And you can see in that information, it actually tells you that this is a question pool. It is selecting one question from two questions, and it's worth 1 point each, because remember the questions all need to be a similar point value. So you can see very easily that this quiz contains 5 individual questions, and the 6th question is a question pool, which I called easy questions. Right, we're going to take a look at setting up reports. What are reports and what can be included in a report, and who gets to see these reports? So on a particular quiz, from the drop-down list, from the action menu, you'll see an option there that says set up reports. So let's see what is available to us when we are going to be setting up a report. So once you click on Set Up Reports, it'll take you to a page where there is an Add Report button. So if you have never done this before, it'll look pretty blank, similar to what you're seeing on the screen. And you would click the Add Report button to set up a report. Once you click on Add Report, this looks very busy on the screen, but actually this information is presented to you in a horizontal format. You have an option of selecting one of 5 potential reports. So each of these options here, A, B, C, D, and E, are different reports that you can choose. So the report type is either question statistics, and B is a question detail, C is user statistics, D is attempt details, and E is user attempts. So the first thing you would do would be to give the report a name. So you would type that into the first field, and you can see, as previously, all mandatory titles have the little asterisk next to it. So you would give the report a name and then decide which of these reports would you like to have. So let's go with the one around question statistics. I would select the option A there, question statistics. Then within that, you can use those check marks to select which of these items would you like to include on your report. So you can decide if you would like to display the class average, display the score distribution, include bonus questions, show outer value. Any of those options, you can just enable or disable the check mark. And then at the bottom there, you can decide when would you like to release this report? So when does this report become available? So you can either choose immediately, which would mean that this information would become available immediately after completing this quiz, or you could make this report information become available on a designated date and time. So that might be useful if you have, for example, drawn up a quiz and you've allowed someone to complete it, say, 5 times. You wouldn't want all of this information immediately available after the first attempt. Maybe you would only want to make it available after the quiz had closed, in which case you could use the date and time to make this information become available. And then you would decide who is going to see this information. So who is this report going to be released to? So you can decide that it's just for the lecturer or just for the student, or maybe you would like it for both. So you can use the check mark options here to decide who is going to see the information on this particular report. You can set up multiple reports. So say, for example, you wanted them to see all of the question statistics and you wanted them to see all of the question detail. You could set up one report called question statistics and make that available, and then set up an additional report called question details and make that information available as well. And once you had saved that, you would see that on your setup reports page, you would see that your report would appear there, the one that you had actually created. And of course, you can always go in, as with most things, go in and edit it if you decided that it needed a slight change. So you can add additional reports and you can go in and edit reports as well. Right, so viewing reports, as you can see, you can make the reports available either immediately or on designated dates and times, and you can also select who is going to see this information on the report. So how would you actually access a report that has been created? So you as a lecturer, under the designated quiz, would go on the action menu and select View Report. So once you click on View Report, you would see the reports that had been made available to you. And all you would have to do would be to click on the title of the report that had been made available to you, and you would see all of the information that had been selected via the check marks. And this is very similar to the student view as well. They would also see on their completed quiz attempts, once it had reached the time when the report would be released, they would see an option to view a report as well. Just checking a message here, chat from Renee, talking about question pools and saying that they seem to operate somewhat differently to Vula, where she had used the pools somewhat like you suggest to use the library and sections in Amathuba. Yeah, so Renee, yes, those features were also available in Vula as well. The library and pulling questions across into multiple quizzes. So using the library as a central repository. So those elements are very similar in Amathuba. Renee, would you like to say something a bit more about the differences that you've picked up?
Sure. I'm a little bit limited because I didn't come to your first session on quizzes. Last year.
No problem.
Crazy. I've never actually used the libraries tool the libraries in the Vula quizzes. So it's new and it seems a much more sensible way to set things up. We were just setting up a question pool in the question pools, and we would use that to give different students different versions of the same questions. This is a maths quantitative literacy course. So when students are doing things online, we don't want everyone to get the same questions.
Correct, yes.
Yeah, but we were also using the pool as a library, not realizing there was that feature there. So it's good to know, and we'll use it going forward.
Great. Thanks, Renee. Yeah, so the library is very useful because it means you can really quickly and easily populate quizzes, drawing from, questions that are sitting in the central repository. And then the pools work very similar to Vula by giving the random selection from the designated pool. Right, so we've taken a look at, thanks, Renee.
Can I ask something else?
Yes,
so
sure.
As things getting moved across, so I'm yet to do this sort of basic thing in my course to be migrated.
Right.
We've got question pools sitting there, and that is sort of my library. How is that going to be moved across? Or maybe this is the wrong space to ask that.
Yeah, so there are ways. It does require, because okay, let's go back to basics. So there's two different systems, right? Two different platforms. But having said that, there is a lot of commonality between the two. If you have things like in Vula, quizzes where you've already created question pools, so that's not just sort of a regular straight quiz that has static questions. It's got some kind of built-in logic. You can actually replicate that, as you see now. I mean, the functionality is there within Amathuba. So you can pull that across. It does require a little bit of manual intervention just to make sure that all the settings are correct so that the functionality is going to work seamlessly within the Amathuba and in the expected way with your pools and your random selections and the amounts of questions that each student is going to be served up. So there is a way of moving it across, and there is actually some documentation around that, but if you
Okay.
need assistance with that as well, you're welcome to email the SILT help desk, or also get assistance through one of the consultations. But
Okay.
it's very possible to move them across. You won't lose them. Having said that, we did deal a little bit with in the first webinar about question types. Depending on which question types you've used in Vula, again, there is a lot of overlap, and a lot of the question types in Vula move over to Amathuba very seamlessly. There are a couple that have some quite complex functionality attached to them. And I've noted that you were talking about maths literacy. So if you've used like specific notation or complex formulas, because in Amathuba, for the numerical type of question, you can actually create a question that is based purely on a formula, on your range of variables. So again, students would get different questions presented to them based on your formula. So if you had some kind of complex questions like that, it may need a little bit of additional intervention or slight adaptation, but there are ways to make it work pretty much exactly the same.
Okay. Thank you.
Sure, no problem.
Yep.
Right, so those are reports, and as you can see, pretty easy to set up, a good selection of information you can make available, and deciding who you would actually like to make this information available, whether it's students, lecturers, tutors, or anybody else that's actually using your particular course. So on the next slide, we're going to have a look at statistics. So here we can see that on the statistics slide, there is an option to generate a CSV, an Excel, and an HTML. So HTML just means that the information, the statistic information, the graphs and things would be presented to you within the system on a web page. If you make question statistics available to students as well, just to note that they don't get the option of CSV and Excel, they don't get the downloadable options, they just see it generated HTML, which is on the page within Amathuba itself. You can, if you want to, optionally apply some filters if you're looking for statistics around specific dates and put from and to, but you can leave these completely blank as well to get a comprehensive overview of question statistics. So once you generate these statistics, this is a pretty rudimentary example. There's not a lot of data here, but it just gives you an idea of some of the information that is available in table and graph format. And it's quite handy to be able to export that to CSV or straight to Excel, or to print. So the print in this option would be obviously if you had a printer, or you could actually print it to PDF, make a PDF file from this. And the last thing we're going to take a look at quickly are attempts logs. So as you might expect, this is people who have attempted the actual quiz. So again, you would find this on the action menu of the actual selected quiz where you wanted to see the attempt log. So you would click on the downward pointing arrow, and from the drop-down list, you would pick attempt logs. And on the attempt logs page, there's some information to note at the top. So first of all, you'll see right below the heading where it says attempt logs, there are two tabs. So the first one it lands on by default is called Overview, and there's another one next to that, which we'll take a look at in a minute, called Detailed. But on the Overview tab, this information is presented to you, and you can see that you can also toggle by event. So at the moment, it's showing you kind of everything, but you could actually filter this to quiz, only showing the quiz entry, time and date stamps, or the quiz completion, time and date stamps, deletions or restored. That's more for your side of things, not the student. So you can see over here, it's showing you the quiz entry and the quiz completion, time and date stamps here. But if you would like to filter those, you could use those toggles at the top of the overview page. And then on the next screen, you can take a look at the detailed view. So you can see for detailed view, it gives you a much more detailed look at the attempt logs. So here you can see the quiz entry. You can see a response to question 1 was saved, then page 1 was saved, then the quiz submission confirmation screen arrived. So you can literally see every single event that triggers in the system will have a time and date stamp on the detailed view. So if you're looking for something specific, make sure that you're looking at the detailed view of the attempt logs. At the bottom of the attempt logs, you can see there that you can also show more results per screen. So by default, it just shows you 10 per page, and you might have a lot of pages. So it's more handy to actually change that drop-down list and actually go up. I think it goes up to about 100 results per page, and it makes it easier to actually find things that you're looking for. So always remember that there's more than just the 10 that are shown to you initially. So we've been through quite a lot of information today, and we will make the webinar recording and slides available to you, but there are also some additional resources available and some support mechanisms. So we do have a quizzes guide, an Amathuba quiz guide, which is available on the SILT Amathuba page. And we also have a designated area on the SILT website for Amathuba resources for staff and for students. We will provide you the links with those. But on the SILT website, you will find there is a link on the homepage which takes you straight through to the Amathuba resources. If you need any additional assistance, please email the SILT help desk. And if you have any other questions or feedback, you are welcome to email amathuba@uct.ac.za. And as mentioned, there is a comprehensive list of resources which are being added to all the time. On the SILT website, there is a link on the homepage which says Amathuba, and it'll take you straight to these resources and more. So if you're stuck, please use any of these help and support resources available here. Liz, I see you have unmuted your mic. Would you like to ask a question?
Oh, Kath, I am sorry. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay, great. I do. Precious, the convener obviously deals with the questions for a quiz, but then I deal with exporting the scores. I don't. I've looked through my notes from quiz 1, but how do I export the scores to CSV or Excel? The quiz scores.
Yeah, so there's options within. I can actually just send you an email which outlines that for you, because remember there's a couple of ways to do it. So if you've elected for the results to go straight to gradebook, then that would be a very easy way to do it. And remember, the gradebook option gives you the addition of the student number, which is something which is quite the unique identifier. So
yes.
you would go to your gradebook, and you could actually just, if you just wanted that quiz, not all of the items in gradebook, you could select to just export that particular set of results from that designated quiz, and along with the student's name, and remember the student number, which is sometimes called the org ID, that is their student number, and that would export straight to what you're looking for, CSV or Excel.
Excellent. That's if I choose straight to gradebook.
Yeah, if your quiz results are going to gradebook. If your quiz results are not going to gradebook, then within the quiz itself, there is an option to actually download the submissions or download the results, essentially. I can send you some steps as to how to do that. And also it should be in the resource as well, I think.
Oh, thank you so much, Kath.
Sure, no problem. Right. Any more questions at this stage? Thank you very much for joining us today. You're welcome to type into the chat or unmute if you have any further questions.
No, just thank you and Chengwen, as always, for what you're doing for us. Thank you.
Thank you, Liz. Right, so thank you everybody for being here. As I said, we will supply these resources to you, and please contact us if you need additional assistance. Thank you very much for being here for our quiz part 2. webinar. And thanks very much to Chengwen as well for sharing the slides, and have a great rest of your afternoon.